The truth is that fall fishing can be a huge struggle.
Huge.
As a matter of fact, fall fishing can downright suck at times. And if you are out there still fishing, trying to catch a bass, whether you're in kind of the beginning of fall or later in fall, and you are struggling, this video is for you. We're gonna talk about why a lot of anglers struggle in the fall, and also talk about how to overcome those struggles so that you can consistently catch bass. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. Now, before we get into the video, I wanted to let you guys know that my bass hats are currently 20% off on the website. This is an extremely unique hat made with a wooden bass badge made from a bourbon barrel. So if you guys are on the market for a hat, right now is the best time to buy. I've got some snapbacks, I've got some flex fits, and I'm gonna leave a link down below in the description. It's a great way to help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel. All right, so let's talk about fall time bass fishing. And in this video, I really want to talk about the why when it comes to fall time bass fishing. Why is fall such a struggle? Because I think if you understand the why, it will really help you in knowing the how to go out there and attack the bodies of water that you fish and actually start catching fish and putting them in the boat or on the bank if you are a bank angler. Now, the big thing with fall fishing, I really see there being two main kind of phases of fall time bass fishing. You kind of have this first beginning phase, which is kind of the summer to fall transition. And really around where I am, kind of the Midwest region, I see a lot of times that this is going to be water temperatures between about 72 degrees, and as it's going down to about 58 to 60 degrees. So somewhere in that kind of 60 to 70 degree range, this is kind of the start of fall time bass fishing around here. Now that may be a little bit different depending on where you live in the country, but this part of fall really encompasses a lot of the hardest parts of fall fishing. In my opinion, this is the hardest time of the year to go out there and consistently catch bass. And the biggest reason, and one of the biggest struggles that guys have when it comes to this time of the year, is that there's really no main patterns that are happening. And the reason that there is no main pattern is because a lot of times during this summer to fall transition, you're going to have the fall turnover. This is when the top layer of the lake that you're fishing mixes with the bottom layer. And when it flips, what it does is it really spreads the oxygen out throughout the entire lake. Now, with that being said, if there is now oxygen throughout the entire body of water, those bass also get very spread out. They can now be in really deep water. They can be in kind of those medium depth zones. They can also be in extremely shallow water. So because the bass are so spread out, there's really no main patterns that you can go out there and catch fish. Now, there are going to be some patterns, like depending on the lakes that you're fishing. You know, if you have a lot of grass in your lakes, for example, this is the time of year when frogging and mat flipping can start to be really good, and that is a pattern. But even with that being said, a lot of times you're not going to be able to run all over the lake and find fish doing that. There's going to be really small sections where the bass can be caught doing that. The big thing that I want you to understand about this first phase of fall bass fishing is that the bass are extremely spread out. They can be a little bit of anywhere. If you fish a river, you might be fishing the main lake. You might also be fishing some of the big oxbows off that lake or little creeks off of that main river. If you're fishing an impoundment, a reservoir, you know, you might catch fish in the really clear water areas down there by the dam. You might catch them up inside of the pockets, the main creeks. You might catch them way up the river. Again, these fish are going to be extremely spread out. So to me, one of the best things that you can do is simply cover a lot of water. This is something that you will hear me talk about all the time on this channel, is covering water, because in my personal opinion, I follow tournament bass fishing very closely. And whether you fish tournaments or not, this is something that you can still take away, is that some of the best anglers in the world are simply the best at covering water. They are very good at efficiently covering a lot of water. They're not getting too dialed into a lot of different patterns. They are just covering a lot of water, picking off fish here, picking off fish here, always fishing fresh water. When you fish a lot of fresh water, you're going to consistently go out there and catch bass. And this is very important during the fall, and this, especially this early phase of fall bass fishing. So that's what I do. In that early phase, I am going to cover a lot of water. And to me, one of the best baits to do that is a buzz bait. And we're going to talk a little bit more of really diving deep into like the buzz bait fishing and how I go about this later in this video. But that's one of my favorite baits to go out there, because a lot of times what I've found is that bass are kind of looking up in the fall. I have fished in areas during the fall where I'm flipping and pitching a jig, say around standing timber, and I will actually find that I will not catch bass, even though I am in a really bassy looking area, until I switch to something that is above them, something like a buzz bait, maybe a spinner bait, maybe a square bill. Those are 3 lures that I use a ton during this first part of fall to simply go out there and cover a lot of water and use baits that are above the bass. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I do think you can fish below these fish where you will miss them. So covering water, the big thing that I want to let you know when it comes to this is don't spend more than about 20 or 25 minutes in a general area. And what I mean by that is maybe you get to the body of water, maybe you're fishing a reservoir, and you go up into a creek arm on that reservoir and you fish a pocket that's in that creek arm. Fish it for about 15 minutes, but don't just keep on going after that. If you don't catch any fish, move on to another pocket or move to the far back of that creek and test out there. Maybe go out to the mouth of that creek and look around the mouth. Maybe fish a creek channel swing on the outside. You're going to fish a little bit of everything, but you're going to keep that same bait in your hand, that buzz bait, that spinner bait, that square bill, and just keep fishing. Because what happens a lot of times, and I've talked about this a lot, especially during this first phase of the fall, and we're about to get to the second phase, is that you will just pick off a fish here and a fish here and a fish there. Sorry, fish here and a fish there. So you will catch a fish in the back of a creek on a dock. Then you'll go to the main lake and you'll catch one on a channel swing bait. If you're fishing a river, you might catch one on a jetty. For instance, maybe a main river jetty, you're going to catch a fish there. And then you're going to go back into an oxbow and you're going to have a wooden lay down back there and you're going to catch one there. That is what fall time, especially this first part of fall, is all about. It's simply going out, covering water, and just knowing that you are going to catch a fish here and a fish there. That is a lot of the tournaments that I have fished during this time of the year, which a lot of times happens in late September, October, early November. That is how tournaments are won, because guys go out there, they simply cover water, they keep a couple of lures in their hand, and that really helps them to succeed. And when they catch one, this is the other thing. Sure, there might be a few more fish in that area. It's always good to fish that immediate area where you caught a bass really hard, but don't get too caught up on a specific area, because again, those bass are super spread out during this time of the year. So catching one here, great. You caught that fish that's in that area. Keep moving. Catch another fish here, another fish there. I think that is really, really important. And I think that if you're not doing that, you can really, really struggle. I think that if you catch one and you really try to soak that area because you think there's a lot more bass there, that can also hurt you, because the guy who covers water, I'm going to keep saying that, is going to catch a lot more fish. Now, let's talk about the second part of fall. And again, to me, in the immediate area that I live in, and a lot of lakes that I fish around here, the water temperatures in kind of this later part of fall is going to be somewhere around 60 degrees and below, kind of that 58. You know, I really like fishing out there in the fall when that water temperature is anywhere from about 48 degrees to 58 degrees. To me, that happens a lot in later fall, and during those water temps, it seems like the bass are really feeding heavily, especially in my area, because a bass, when you have lakes that freeze over during the winter, bass simply are not feeding a whole lot. They actually don't need to feed a whole lot. They can eat a bait fish or a crawfish every now and then during the winter, and it's going to sustain them for a while because bass are cold-blooded. And so when the water temperature is down, their immune system, their metabolism is down. They're not expending as many calories as they are in hotter water. So they simply do not need to feed a lot during the winter. Now, it does seem that you will have this fall feed in kind of that later fall period where the bass are really feeding heavily. Now, we're going to go from one extreme to the complete opposite because, again, that first part of fall, we just talked completely about that. It's really hard. It's difficult to go out there and catch fish. Now, the second part of fall, to me, what I have seen is that bass tend to start grouping up. You actually, in my opinion, you will find some really big schools of bass in this late fall period. But the only thing is that there's not big schools everywhere. And this is why the late fall can also be really hard, is because you will have these really big groups of bass, but they are in really small confined areas. Maybe it's a 100-yard section of a creek channel swing bank in a lake. And you might think that, hey, I can run around again and find more fish like this. And you definitely can pattern fish better in later fall, where you can actually go hit more. If there's fish on a creek channel swing, you might be able to go hit more other creek channel swings and catch them. But it seems like there are just random, really big schools and areas. So you can fish all day and you won't hit you won't be catching a lot, but then you'll hit that one area and you can absolutely load the boat. It's really a lot different than what we saw in that beginning part of the fall. But the same thing to me really applies. I like to cover a lot of water during this time of the year. I like to go out there, fish a little bit of everything. Now, in that later fall, there are a few patterns that I really kind of look for. And the big thing for me is creek channel swing banks. Like I already talked about it, or I already said it a little bit, but a lot of times in your main creeks that are kind of off of the main lake, you're going to have these creek channels that meander throughout that arm, that tributary that comes in. A lot of times, if you can find a point that hits up against that creek channel, or even the creek channel swing bank itself, those areas can be really, really good. Because what I have found is that when bass are kind of retreating to the main lake, maybe they're up in the creek feeding all over the place, but as they start to kind of come from the pockets, from the back, they will collect in some of these areas. It's kind of like the reverse of when bass actually push up during the spawn. But now they're kind of coming from everywhere in that creek, and they're kind of confiding to a few small areas in that creek. And so you still want to go around, cover a ton of water, but once you actually start catching a fish, this is the time where you really want to put on the brakes. And this is a time where I'm really going to fish a number of different lures. So for me, I really start again with something pretty fast. A lot of times it might be still that same buzzbait, that topwater. And this is a real quick side note. I've said this a million times on the channel before, but a buzzbait will catch you bass in really cold water. And I think a lot of people have not done this before, because I have caught bass on buzzbaits when that water temp, the surface temp, was 47, 48, 49 degrees. That's really cold water. The big thing with the buzzbait when it's really cold is you really just want to creep that thing across the surface, and you're not going to get a ton of bites doing this, but the ones that bite it are giant bass typically during the fall. But anyways, what I was saying is that you still want to go out there and cover a lot of water, but when you start catching bass, this is the time where I really will slow down. Maybe it's a small creek arm or a small pocket. If I catch one, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to fish everything very thoroughly in there, because you a lot of times will find bigger schools of fish in a small area. And you can absolutely, this is one of my favorite times of the year to fish, because if you find these little areas, you can just catch them like crazy. And it can be a struggle for a lot of other anglers out there, and you will go out there and have one of the best days of your life. And a lot of times it's fun fishing too. Like it's the fun techniques that we like to do. There's a lot of talk about forward-facing sonar these days. I love my forward-facing sonar, but I love that late fall time because a lot of times I'm throwing, again, spinner baits, square bills, buzz baits. I'm just having a lot of fun looking at pieces of cover, a stump, a laydown, a dock, and just throwing it up there and just catching a lot of fish and being around the bass. So that is something that I do a lot during the fall. To me, those are kind of the two big phases of the fall. Now, with that being said, if you guys still don't really understand what I mean by covering water, I did a video all about that. And I'm going to leave it linked right here. Because again, we talked about covering water a lot. I think it's really, really important. And I explain it a little bit more in this video and actually show you on the water how I do it. So guys, thanks for watching. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.